So the first series was a huge success, and rightfully so. With thousands across the country tuning in to watch it, it gained both praise towards the show itself and the Reverend Audrey's books. Audrey also approved of the show's finished product as it stuck mostly to his stories. So, a second series was put into production.
Series 2 was released in 1986 with another collection of 26 episodes, same production team behind it and the same narrator, but bringing in new characters, set locations and music pieces. Did it do better than the series before it?
Short answer? Well, yeah, but not perfectly. Long answer? Well, that's what this video is for, so let's get right into discussing about the episodes.
So, one of the first things to point out is that this series is the first not to be made entirely out of Wilbert's stories. Yeah, there was Thomas's Christmas Party in Series 1 written exclusively by Britt Allcroft and David Mitton, but Series 1 was still around 96% Wilbert's stories. This time, 5 stories were written by his son Christopher, who had taken up the role of author for the Railway series in 1983 with Really Useful Engines, after Wilbert wrote his last book Tramway Engines in 1972. Remember that terrible video I did 3 years ago on the episode Better Late Than Never?
My pits are sweaty.
I wish I didn't. In that video, I explained that Britt Allcroft was under a contract to only make episodes from the book's stories, but they wanted to make more stories with Thomas as the focus. So, they forced Christopher to publish a book of Thomas-focused stories that same year, just so they had Thomas stories to adapt for Series 2. 3 of the 4 stories were chosen from said book, titled More About Thomas the Tank Engine, consisting of Thomas Percy and the Coal, The Runaway, and Better Late Than Never, as well as 2 other stories previously written by Christopher, Thomas and Trevor, a magazine story, and Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree, a Railway series spin-off story. As a result, he felt displeased with the 3 book-written stories, not just from being forced to write them, but also because it felt like they were rushed. Which I can kind of understand when looking at those stories specifically. While I have a personal connection to Thomas Percy and the Coal, as it was one of, if not the first episode of the show I ever watched, as far as my family has ever told me, and my love for the opening shot of Better Late Than Never with Edward and Henry crossing the viaduct, they are both not really that great. Meanwhile, The Runaway, I feel, just kind of exists. Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree, while a sweet finale to Series 2, also just kind of exists. And Thomas and Trevor is actually my least favourite story of the entirety of Series 2 because of Thomas acting like he doesn't understand how road vehicles can be useful, despite it being years at this point since he met Terence who helped him out of the snow. Speaking of when stories take place, it's time to talk once again about the stories that are told out of order or left out entirely. You know why I nitpicked them in Series 1, and there's somehow even more of them here. But to give Series 2 credit, they managed to make a lot of them work. Stories like the aforementioned Christopher ones, as well as Ghost Train and Woolly Bear, take place in the books years after the other Series 2 stories. But none of the stories in the books featured any appearances of characters who shouldn't be there yet, so those ones I can look past and just enjoy them for what they are. Or at least most of them. But then you get when they try to adapt stories from the books Percy the Small Engine, Duck and the Diesel Engine, 8 Famous Engines, and Branchline Engines, where the problem of story order rears its ugly head again. Percy the Small Engine ends with the story Percy's Promise, in which Percy makes his way through a flash flood to bring Thomas's passengers home. Not only is that story left completely out of Series 2 and only adapted in Series 3, but after we go from Percy and Harold to The Runaway, we then go to Percy Takes the Plunge, the first story in the 8 Famous Engines book that takes place after Percy's Promise, but the episode references those events as if we just saw them happen.
It was raining hard. Water swirled under my boiler. I couldn't see where I was going, but I struggled on.
When adapting Duck and the Diesel Engine, they skip the story Domeless Engines, where a real-life engine, City of Truro, visits the island of Sodor, and obviously as a Great Western engine, Duck feels proud to meet him. The story is mostly about Gordon trying to go faster than City of Truro and losing his dome, but it's City of Truro's visit that leads into the next story of Duck being proud as he talks endlessly about how good it is to be Great Western, which annoys the other engines. Whereas in this episode, he just decides to start bragging out of nowhere. I can kind of forgive this, seeing as it's believable that Duck could just naturally start to be talkative of his heritage out of nowhere, but City of Truro's visit would have made that just more believable. Though I am glad we did eventually get that episode in, you guessed it, Series 3. When adapting Branchline Engines, they skip the story Bullseyes, where we learn a lot about Daisy the diesel railcar's fear of bulls. In the show, they just have a mention at the start of Percy's predicament that she's afraid of bulls and cows.
She was frightened of bulls and cows.
And the end of the story talks about how she shooed a cow off the line.
She shooed a cow off the line all by herself the other day.
which should have more of an impact as if we saw her run away from a bull before, but we didn't, because the story isn't adapted until Series 4. I feel like we could have cut some of the Christopher Audrey stories out to make place for the Wilbert stories for the continuity to make just that little bit more sense, and then keep Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree as the ending.
I know it feels like I'm turning a nitpick into what feels like a huge critique against the series, but I'm not. Don't worry. It's just that there's more of these told out of order stories compared to Series 1, so they need to be pointed out.
There was also 2 cancelled episodes, The Missing Coach and Gordon Goes Foreign, the latter where Gordon gets to cross the bridge from Sodor to England as he gets to take the express all the way to London, and the former being the episode that would have given a proper introduction to Donald and Douglas as they try to work on their own but lose Thomas's special coach. I'm more understanding as to why they cancelled The Missing Coach due to the ending of that story being confusing.
I never said Wilbert's books were flawless either.
But Gordon Goes Foreign seems like it would have been doable. You don't have to build a set for London as Gordon is only ever seen there in a newspaper in the book. They probably wouldn't have had the time and money to build the unique sets for Gordon leaving Sodor as they'd already spent so much on the other sets, which I'll talk about later.
So after that little rant about the stories that were left out and the 5 Christopher stories, how good are the other 21 episodes of Series 2? Fucking brilliant!
You know what I said about Series 1, the first half of episodes not being as eventful as the second half? That is not the case at all with Series 2. Yeah, you get the episodes that aren't as eventful as others, like when Gordon and Henry get stopped by a cow on a bridge, or when Percy doesn't understand signals after Gordon and James play a trick on him, or when Daisy refuses to pull a milk van. But the rest have so much more stuff going on. Not just with the same subtle moral storytelling as before, but so many good ones to choose from, it made it hard for me to choose my favourites at the end of this. There's also so much more exhilaration to the stories while still keeping a laid-back tone. Like, how does it do that? If an engine is moving at high speed, you feel that high speed. If something is tense, you feel that tension rising and then lower back down again. There is much more accidents in this series that are once again never entirely played for laughs and show the dangers that they cause, even if they can sometimes be funny. Plus, as this is a sequel series, it builds upon the scope of Sodor and adds all new locations we never got to see in the previous series. I personally love the sets for Knapford Harbour and Brendam Docks, which I will talk more about once I get to the sets and music.
I'm not going to go through every moral of Series 2 like I did with Series 1, because by doing that, I feel like I'd be expected to go through every single moral of the show with every single series, where the morals either become less and less subtle, or there's just no moral to begin with. Trust me, I'm saving myself a lot of writing. I'll instead talk about the characters, because not only do we have our returning favourites, we also have some new ones.
Let's start with the new characters first. Not only do we get some new steam engine characters, those being the Great Western Tank Engine Duck, the Scottish twin tender engines Donald and Douglas, and the tank engine twins Bill and Ben, we meet Trevor the traction engine and Harold the helicopter as some new non-engine characters, as well as our first 3 Diesels to join the railway, consisting of Diesel, Daisy and Boko. Diesel is the first villainous and or devious character to be introduced, as his story focuses on him claiming to be revolutionary and trying to prove it as he tries to turn the other engines against Duck after he plays a trick on him, only to be sent away off screen for some reason. These new characters are not just thrown in for the sake of merchandise like many other shows introducing new characters. They all feel like natural inclusions to that universe and are very strong and memorable. My only sort of exception being Trevor. His story Saved from Scrap is heartwarming, where Edward convinces a vicar who has an orchard near his branch line to buy Trevor, but that's about as much that we get of Trevor besides the aforementioned Thomas and Trevor, a story I don't really like. Boko, Bill and Ben surprisingly get a worse treatment, only having one shared episode to themselves and appear in only a few other stories as side characters, but I still feel like there's more to them that makes me want to see them more in the next series. My favourites out of all the new characters would definitely have to be Duck, Donald and Douglas. Duck, for just how much he was used in Series 2, mainly in the first half either as a side character or as a main, as well as being a welcome addition to the show as a no-nonsense dedicated worker proud of his heritage who isn't afraid to have a laugh every now and again. And Donald and Douglas for how they only have 2 stories to themselves, but still leave such a strong impact as determined brothers who work hard so that neither one gets sent away for scrap. The Deputation is one of the best episodes of all the engines banding together as they save the twins by talking to the Fat Controller to let them stay. It's like they're not just engines who work with each other, they're family. I know I'm really bringing the sentimentality up with this, but it's the truth. My favourite character out of the whole of Series 2 though is Edward. Henry is and always has been my favourite character of them all, but he actually has no stories to himself in Series 2 other than sharing one episode, Cows, with Gordon and Edward, and appears for the rest of the series as a side character. Edward is definitely my second favourite, and yes, I can practically smell the irony from the fact that he's my second favourite character and he is also Sodor's number 2. Not literally.
Where am I going in my life at this point?
While Henry is who I relate to, Edward is who I strive to be at some point in my life. Kind, wise, comfortable where he is in life, and doesn't take shit from others. My least favourite character is once again Thomas for the same reasons I gave in the last video, even though he is more tolerable in this series as he is slightly more mature, as are the other characters. Now then, onto the sets and music, because there is quite a lot to discuss. We'll start with the old locations and how they've been updated. In Series 1, the sets were already beautiful, but you could tell they were kept relatively simple for the sake of their smaller budget. In this, presumably with the money to spend, they do things like make the stations more crowded with trucks and coaches to make them look much busier than before. Like it really is a busy railway. We also get unique camera angles on said familiar sets we never saw previously, so seeing these old places never gets repetitive. The new locations feel like we're getting to see more of the railway we hadn't seen before. To bring up Knapford Harbour and Brendam Docks again, I love the differences between them despite being two different locations by the sea. Knapford Harbour has the large cranes and busy station, but there's also a vast open sandy beach and the little bridge with green hills bringing a wholesome little harbour near a country town vibe. Brendam Docks, however, is much larger, full of tall cranes, ships, big buildings and sheds. Very much more industrial and bustling with much more noise. One episode I want to talk specifically about with set design doesn't use these sets at all, and is very special to the series for its extremely spooky atmosphere, and that is Ghost Train. We rarely ever had gotten any episodes set at night back in Series 1, and any nighttime shots in Series 2 up to this point showed off how pretty the sets could look at night, but never spooky. Ghost Train creates a genuinely terrifying atmosphere, not just from shrouding everything in fog, but having lighting at just the right setting so that we can just about see the silhouettes of Sodor's locations, making the setting incredibly haunting. The music is spectacular as always. We've not just got the older themes remixed now that Mike and Junior have started to use a different synthesizer, but the new themes, like the new characters, fit in brilliantly. There's a lot more instances where shots play on with no narration so that we can sit back and listen to just how great these music pieces are. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's unintentionally awkward and funny, like this long scene in The Deputation, and no, I won't give you any context, I'll just let you embrace the unintentional humour.
There was a long silence.
These are actually some of my favourites in the whole series despite not including Henry's theme, so I'll play some of my favourites right now. course some other production related aspects that are exclusive to this series, just like with Series 1. However, not all of it's good. I'll start with the positives. This series feels like it has a much warmer colour palette compared to Series 1. I think the warmer orangey red tint is more noticeable on the VHS versions of the episodes compared to the HD digital restored versions, but the fact that it's there in the first place, I love it. It's like doing that little bit extra to keep its relaxed but energetic tone. The narration is also a lot of fun, which is something that I failed to mention in the last review. Ringo Starr reads these stories in such a unique way that carries both the liveliness and energy for a kids show, but still sounding dignified and easy on the ears for adults, with the odd voice crack here and there, though it is hilarious when it happens.
Just look what you've done to our breakfast.
One specific bit of narration I want to point out is with the episode Cows, where Ringo does what I think is both the funniest and saddest moo I have ever heard in all my life.
Moo!
Ringo, mate, you deserve a gold star. A ring gold star, you might say. I am so sorry. I think that's about the most praise to the production I can give before this huge load of negativity coming. There are once again instances where the props are in shot, and also instances of reused shots, which might I add, they seem to do a hell of a lot more in this series than in Series 1 by a long shot. Sometimes they even reuse shots from Series 1. Once again, some inconsistencies with stations being on different parts of the island along different lines. One big inconsistency is actually with Donald and Douglas's episodes. At the end of the deputation, it stated that now that the twins will be staying, their names will be painted on them.
But your names will be painted on you. We'll have no more mistakes.
Despite occasions where they were already seen with their nameplates in not just the last episode, but in the same episode. Oh yes, I'm getting that nitpicky, and oh yes, we are still not done. Sometimes the scaling isn't very accurate and makes it out like Toby is supposedly much bigger than Gordon and Henry. Yeah, alright mate. There is a lot more instances of wonky eyes than Series 1, and in some instances, like in Percy and the Signal, it causes James's face to nearly fall off. Speaking of faces... Oh my god, Gordon, where are your eyebrows? Oh no, it's happening to you too, Edward. Where did they go? You look like you're in pain!
I mean, I did chuckle at some of these goofs when they happened, but the fact is, this is supposed to be a series that fixes the issues of the last one. Series 1 I can forgive more for its technical faults because of its lower budget, and the fact that it was the first time the production crew had ever done a show like this. Series 2 may have more consistency with its brilliant stories, but the goofs really hold it back.
There's also one more aspect to the production that's neither a setback nor a thing of praise, it's just there for some reason. The engines, mainly the original 7 from Series 1, are given not just their standard smiling faces, but also very Kristen Stewart mouth hanging open smiles. I'll leave it up to you to decide if these goofy faces are either a positive or a negative thing, but I hereby dub this questionable production choice as the Series 2 Derp Face Syndrome.
This review is driving me insane. On to my top 5 episodes.
Moo!
As it was much harder for me to pick my favourites, except for my top 3, I'd figured I'd make a list of my honourable mentions as I talk about them. Bertie's Chase, a fun little story with an engaging chase featuring a nice little remix of Bertie the Bus's theme. Percy Takes the Plunge, a cool crash with a good lesson on never getting big-headed over things you have accomplished in the past, even if they haven't happened yet. Better late than never. Yes, I know the moral is confusing, but I do really love that opening scene with the viaduct. The Diseasel. Just the right introduction to Bill and Ben that we needed, and the joke they play on Boko is quite funny. Ghost Train, for the reasons I previously stated about the set design, and it being a funny prank on Percy's behalf, and Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree, because again, despite what I said about it just existing, it really is a sweet and heartwarming ending to Series 2, with all the engines together in one big, beautiful set at the station covered in snow and lights. Wait, why's Diesel there? I thought he was sent away. Now let's get to the top 5.
Moo!
Percy and Harold. I feel like I could recommend this episode purely on the music that plays during Percy and Harold's race alone. But there's much more to this episode than that. It's the first time we meet Harold, a character that neither runs on rails or on the road. He's a helpful worker to the railway, but he's actually quite snooty and thinks that railways are slow and out of date as he looks down on them.
Oh, I get it. It's because he's a helicopter. Back at it again with the subtlety, aren't we, Wilbert?
The fact that it's Percy that gets to show him up and have the time of his life in a high-speed race at the same time is very fun to see. And once again to mention it, the music in this race is spectacular. My favourite part of it being this high-angle tracking shot.
And Harold was high and alongside.
Fantastic.
Moo!
Old Iron. One of 3 Runaway episodes in this series, and this one is my second favourite. It's not just a moment for Edward to shine by saving another engine from causing a serious accident either to himself or someone else, but also proving his importance to James, who previously mocked him for being slow and clanking around. The way it switches tone from James laughing as he runs down the line only to realise he has no driver is done so effectively, both in narration and in music.
What a lark! What a lark! He chuckled to himself. Suddenly he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop! Help! Help!
My favourite part probably being this tracking shot that not only tracks the engines, but also goes up and over a bridge and drops back down to the engines again. They could have just done some more simple shots of them running through the countryside and that would have been enough, but nope, they went above and beyond, literally. That was the last one, I swear to God. Once again, the show manages to highlight the dangers of a runaway train with a character-driven story behind it.
Moo!
Wrong Road. I'm putting this one on the list mainly from its sets and music, seeing as the story isn't actually very action-packed or eventful. But my god, the look and sound of this episode is amazing. The shots of the big station and the viaduct at night are stellar, as well as the opening shots of Thomas going past the watermill and Edward crossing the small bridge with that magical score is just wow. If you asked me to show you exactly how great the sets and music in the show could get, this would definitely be an episode I would go to, along with many others. The story is pretty funny with how one misunderstanding leads to a whole landslide of things going wrong that night, but the look and sound of Wrong Road is what I remember and love the most.
Moo!
A Close Shave, another Runaway episode, and this one is my favourite of the 3 in this series. Not only a tense, out-of-control runaway story, but a conclusion to the previous story of Duck being sent away to Edward's station due to Diesel telling lies about him. We're already feeling bad for Duck and it looks like things are going alright with him working well with Edward, until Edward's train breaks away and starts chasing Duck at dangerous speeds as he essentially runs for his life. Then it becomes a matter of trying to stop the train before it can cause any damage, which he somewhat manages to do by stopping it from running into the back of James, but then runs into a siding and crashes into a barber shop, and the result is devastating. The barber getting angry and covering Duck's face with shaving cream kind of takes away the seriousness of the accident, but still,
holy look at all this damage!
It even ends on a sweet note with the Fat Controller saying he sent Diesel away and that the engines are sorry for what they did, so as soon as Duck is mended, he comes home to a big rousing welcome. This was a brilliant episode, but like every number 2 spot, it just couldn't beat number 1.
Moo!
Edward's Exploit. This is both the best stories in Series 2 and Edward's best story of all time. A story about determination and never giving up despite severe injuries that if it were any other engine, they most likely wouldn't have pushed themselves to keep going. But not Edward. He manages to bring home an enthusiast train of heavy coaches with a broken crank pin, meaning he is essentially moving with only 2 of his 4 driving wheels, and despite tiring himself out immensely, still presses on, proving his value to the railway and every engine that ever doubted him. Edward may be much older than all the others on Sodor and may not be as versatile, but he has an iron will that cannot be broken, accompanied by gloomy visuals to show how dire the situation is, with a triumphant remix of his theme is just perfection. My favourite Series 2 story, and one of my favourite stories in the series in general. So, we now come to the conclusion. While better than Series 1, Series 2 was not perfect by any means. Many of its technical goofs and few instances of uneventful stories held it back in many ways. But those aside, the rest of the stories are so engaging and entertaining with great new characters, beautiful new locations, fantastic sound and music, it makes me love Series 2, regardless of those faults. They just have to be pointed out for the sake of fair criticism. I'd even go so far to say if that these goofs were less prominent than in Series 1, this would probably be in a shot at being one of my favourite series of the show. This series is probably the most classic of the classic series, as in the Thomas fandom, I believe everyone has at least 3 or 5 favourite episodes in the whole show that come directly from this series. For that, it holds a special place in their hearts and mine. Series 2 rightfully takes its place as the wonky-eyed but gorgeous spectacle of Thomas and Friends.
As for the next series, well, it's going to be quite the one to review, not just because it's my favourite of the classic series, but the top 3 episodes that I have of that series are my top 3 episodes of all time. And if you've been watching these videos and you know me, you already know what number 1 is. But I will save that for the next review, so I'll see you guys next time for Series 3.